Welcome everyone to Maaseh Merkavah, Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the workings of the Chariot, Maaseh Merkavah. We're following up. This is really the second week that we are concentrating on the number 4 and its significance in the vision of Ezekiel. Maaseh Merkavah. And the reason that we're spending so much time analyzing the number 4 is because, in a certain way, that is the secret, that's the theme, the foundation that runs through the vision. We already learned the verses which talked about that he sees Chariot, a certain type of angel, but they had the appearance of a human being. And this image had 4 faces: an ox, a lion, an eagle, and a man. But then we learned that each of these four faces had four faces. And then, depending on the commentary, perhaps another 4 faces, and even that another 4 faces, up to possibly 256 faces, and the same thing with the wings. Each of the faces had 4 wings, and then each of the faces had 4 wings, and it's whether it's 4 times 4 times 4, or 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. So you can see why the number 4 is so fundamental, because that is the basic structure that he is seeing. This is the fabric of the universe that he is being shown. And so we are continuing looking at the significance of 4. Hopefully anyone who missed the class last week can get it on our website, on YouTube, on Telegram, and our WhatsApp group. So we're continuing with the significance of 4. The bottom line is that we said all of the 4s are ultimately connected to the 4-letter name of God. And we went through a whole series of 4s in the physical world: the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, the 4 forces of modern physics, the directions, states of reality. We went through 4s in the level of soul, and on the level of divinity, it's the 4-letter name of God. But now we will go into new areas here. So one of the things that is very, very important, it goes back to the very first verse of Ezekiel, where he says that he is in exile. He was taken from Jerusalem forcibly and exiled to Babylonia. And the whole vision is in the context of his being in exile. These are ideas that we learned in the first few classes. But here I want to revisit it, because at that point we did not connect it to the number 4 per se. But according to tradition, there are 4 cardinal exiles in Jewish history. The first one being this one, Babylonia. The second one being Persia. That's the whole Purim story. Third one being Greece. And the fourth being Rome. And it's considered that we're still in this 4th exile, even though we're back in Israel and have 1 foot in redemption. But nonetheless, especially this last year and a half, Israel fighting wars on 7 fronts simultaneously, tells us we're still in exile. But the idea that there are 4 cardinal exiles is very, very important to this whole story, because we discussed, why is Yechezkel being shown this vision in the first place? And we learned that this is towards the end of the prophetic era. And one of the reasons is actually to give hope. Here, Yechezkel is it's what's called a Yotze min haklal. The general principle is prophecy only is happening in Israel. Once we came into Israel, prophecy only happens in Israel. And here's Yechezkel prophesying outside of Israel. And there we learned that because he had begun his prophetic, call it career in Israel, he was allowed, or he was able to continue to prophesy outside of Israel. But the whole context of this vision and the ending of prophecy is to show that even in exile, there would be a continuity. Even when the age of the prophets ended, there still would be Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, and it was, in a certain way, a transition. So here I'm just mentioning the fact that there are 4 exiles, as we said, Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome. Many people will ask an obvious question: what about Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim was almost the classic exile. We were in Israel, Yaakov and his family, and they had to leave Israel and go down to Egypt. And there we were enslaved. And all the miracles that we came out of Egypt. So here we know that the 4-letter name of God, there's also a 5th level, which is called the tip of the Yud. The Yud is the first letter of God's name, but the tip is considered a level in of itself. And that is Mitzrayim. But Mitzrayim was it was so archetypal that it's in a category of its own. So now we'll mention that it's very, very interesting that the person who is most associated with Malchut, which is kingship, which is in a certain way what is lacking at a time of exile, is we don't have our own autonomy. We don't have our own sovereignty. Malchut is in exile. And so the archetypal king of Israel, of course, is David. But if we look at his name, it's very interesting that it's Daled Vav Daled. Daled, of course, equals 4. So his name is 4. Vav means and, 4 and 4. And this we can associate with, there was David. And then at the end of all the exiles will be Mashiach ben David. So David is the first Daled, and Mashiach ben David is the second Daled. And it's the number 4, because 4, as we learned, equals Malchut, is symbolic of Malchut and leadership. Now, we're going to turn, I've mentioned this a number of times, that Yechezkel is not the only one who has experienced what's called Maaseh Merkavah. As we said many, many times, Maaseh Merkavah is a catch-all term for the Jewish mystical tradition. And so Yechezkel is not the first one to what we'll call experience Maaseh Merkavah. Merkava, again, is a chariot. It's a means of going from one place to another. So therefore, it represents going from a normative consciousness into a higher level of consciousness. And as we've learned, in almost all cases, it's through meditation that they go to these higher levels of consciousness. And we learned that Aryeh Kaplan is learning the whole first chapter of Ezekiel in a certain way is an explanation of different levels or different stages of elevation during a meditative experience. And so I've mentioned that also Yeshayahu, Isaiah, experienced the Merkava, and Zechariah and Daniel. And so today, I want to concentrate for the next short amount of time on the visions of Zechariah and of Daniel. And the reason is because, again, number 4 is the most important number in their visions. Yeshayahu is seeing from a higher level. Isaiah is experiencing the Merkava from even a higher level than these prophets. And so Ezekiel, Daniel, and Zechariah are in the world of Asiyah or Yetzirah, lower spiritual worlds, or this world itself. And Yeshayahu is in the world of Bria. Only Moshe was able to reach the level of Atzilut with his relationship with God and what he was able to perceive. But we're actually told that of all the prophets, the one that comes closest to Moshe is Isaiah. He is considered, in a certain way, the second most important of all of the prophets. So let's go briefly, and I have to say, in the book of Zechariah, he has many visions, many revelations, even more so in the book of Daniel. He is constantly having visions and dreams and incredibly symbolic visions. Our purpose right now is only to go to a couple of them that use the number 4. And that is why we're delving into it. So in the second chapter of Zechariah, so he sees, and I'll just read it in English, the very beginning of the second chapter says, "Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, 4 horns. And I said to the angel that talked with me, 'What are these?' And he answered me, 'These are the horns which have scattered Yehuda, Yisrael, and Yerushalayim.'" So here it's very prophetic because the 4 horns ultimately represent the 4 exiles. Zechariah is in the first exile and also part of the second in Persia, Babylonia and Persia. But here he's seeing 4 horns, and these represent those who have scattered you. And then it says, "And God showed me 4 craftsmen." First he sees 4 horns, and then he sees 4 craftsmen. And he says, "What are they coming to do?" And he spoke, saying, "These were the horns which scattered Yehuda, so that no man could lift up his head. But these," meaning the 4 craftsmen, "they are coming to terrify them, to cast out the horns of the nations, which lifted up their horn over the land of Yehuda to scatter it." So these 4 craftsmen represent the going out of exile. Just like after Babylonia, after all of the exiles, we returned home. Even now we're returning home, even though it's considered we're still part of the 4th exile. Almost half of all the Jews in the world have returned to Israel. And then shortly later, in the same chapter, it says, "For I have spread you abroad as the four winds of heaven, says God. Escape, O Zion, that dwellest with the daughter of Bavel." So here, this idea that Jews were scattered to the four corners of the world also is a very big part of this, that the four exiles scattered us to the four directions, to the four corners of the world. And now he sees four winds that are going to come and gather us back. And he's saying that you should leave the daughter of Bavel. So this is all in the second chapter. In the sixth chapter, again, the number 4 comes again. And this is all in context of this idea of 4 exiles being scattered to the 4 corners of the world and the 4 winds that ultimately will bring us back to the land of Israel. And this, again, all of this is in the context of Ezekiel's vision, which started, the first thing he says is he was in exile. So the fact that he's seeing all these different fractals or powers of 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, faces and wings, is all part of this bigger context of all of Jewish history, along with seeing the very fabric of the universe. The chariot that he is seeing, or the images or the vision that he's seeing, is also hinting at reality, the very fabric of how the universe works. So in the 6th chapter, and again, we're not going into great depth of this. So he says, the beginning of the 6th chapter of Zechariah, it says, "And I turned and I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there came out 4 chariots." Now, as we mentioned a number of times, the word chariot is never used in Ezekiel's vision. But here, Zechariah sees 4 chariots between 2 mountains. And the mountains were mountains of brass. And this is very similar to Ezekiel's vision, because he describes some of the components of this complex vision that he's seeing as the color of brass. Then he says, in the first chariot, there were red horses. And in the second chariot, black horses. And in the third chariot, white horses. And in the fourth chariot, grizzled bay horses. And then Zechariah asked the angel who is accompanying him in this vision, "What are these?" And the angel answers him and says, "These are the 4 winds of the heavens, which go forth from standing before God of all the earth." And then it talks about that each of these horses of 4 different colors, who are driving 4 different chariots. Now he describes how they go to the 4 different directions. Again, all of this is symbolic terms of the experience of all of Jewish history, of the 4 exiles being scattered to the 4 corners of the world, and the eventual redemption that will bring us back from the 4 directions of the world, the 4 corners of the world, and how each of the exiles, we will somehow come out victorious. So these are some of the symbolism of the visions of Zechariah. Now let's go to Daniel. The book of Daniel is one of the most complicated of all the books of the Bible. His visions are highly symbolic. But here in the 7th chapter, like I say, he had many different visions, but this one is very, very connected to the idea of the number 4. And this is what he says, and you'll see the same themes are coming up again and again. And that's what we said, that all of the different prophets that we're talking about, Daniel technically is not a prophet, but he most certainly had Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. But the same themes are coming up over and over again. And remember, they are all being either through their own efforts, they are climbing a ladder of mystical revelation and meditation, or God is granting them these visions in order that they should be written down and shared with future generations. So Daniel says in the beginning of chapter 7, he said that he was lying on his bed, and I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heavens stirred up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. So here we see the first, he's calling them beasts. The first beast that he sees, one second. And here, the beast, see, this is written in Aramaic, but it's the same thing as Chariot, the same word that Ezekiel is using of this certain type of angel. He sees these Chariot, but here they're more like beasts. It's in a vision, and he's seeing these Chariot in the form of 4 different beasts. Just like the Chariot in Yechezkel's vision has 4 different faces: an ox, a lion, an eagle, and a man. But the first one has 2 of the components of Yechezkel's vision: a lion that had eagle's wings. And behold, and behold, till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made to stand upon 2 feet like a man. So here's the third component of Yechezkel's vision. The lion with eagle's wings now turns into a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast. And now he sees a second beast, like a bear. So this is a different image that he's seeing. And it raised itself up on one side, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told to consume the flesh. And then he sees a third chaya, beast, and this was like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. So again, you can see the very similar imagery is happening in all of these visions. And this beast also had 4 heads, just like in Yechezkel's. And dominion was given to it. And then he says he sees a 4th beast. And he says this beast was more terrible and dreadful than all of the others. So this is representing the 4th exile. which has lasted 2,000 years. So he's seeing that this will be the most dreadful of all of them. And lots of description, how it devours everything around it. And it had 10 horns. And then what happens is, and on one of the horns there were eyes. This is also from Yechezkel's vision, as we're going to get to in probably next week. He saw eyes on the back of one of the visions he was having. And here, and Daniel says, and there was fiery flames and wheels, just like we're going to learn the Ophanim, how the Merkava had wheels. And then a throne appears. And this is something we'll only get at the end of Yechezkel's vision, the idea of the throne. That we're going to have to save. And on this throne also sat a man, as we're going to see exactly what Yechezkel saw, the vision of a man sitting on the throne. But ultimately, the man is actually God. And that we'll get to. And here, at the end of this part of his vision, it says that basically God's holy people will be saved from all of these beasts. And then he gives a vision of a redeemer, that a redeemer will come and dominion will be taken away from all of these kingdoms. And he was called a son of man. And this is a phrase that Yechezkel uses consistently through his whole book, not just Maaseh Merkavah. And he comes with the clouds of heaven. This is one of the ideas, that either Mashiach will come in the clouds of heaven or riding on a donkey, meaning depending on our actions, our merit, either Mashiach will come in a very miraculous way, like on a cloud from heaven, or will come in a more natural way, like riding on a donkey. And then he continues about this fourth beast and how he will rule, and there'll be all kinds of wars, but ultimately the holy people will be saved, and God will make sure that Israel is redeemed. So all of this was just to give us a taste of a continuity through all of these visions. The vision of Yeshayahu is only different in the fact that he saw 6 wings, because he was seeing from a higher level. But he also sees a throne and a man on the throne. They're all very, very similar because they're all called Maaseh Merkavah. As we go further through, we are going to discuss more about the more general idea of Maaseh Merkavah, not necessarily focused on just the visions of Yechezkel and Yeshayahu and Zechariah and Daniel. Okay, now, in a certain way, we're going to switch gears to a very, very interesting idea, an important idea from Rav Ginsburg, that he did not give it over in the context of Maaseh Merkavah, but we're going to apply it to both Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkavah. And that is in one of his books called 913, The Secrets of Creation, where 913 equals the word Bereshit. And so there he asked a very interesting question. He said, when we look at Bereshit and we look at the 7 days of creation, which numbers are actually the most fundamental of creation? Now, if we wouldn't have the information that he's giving over, many people would say 6 or 7, because there were 6 days of creation, and with Shabbat was 7. The word Bereshit has 6 letters. The first verse of the Torah has 7 words. And because this model of 6 and 7 is continued through creation, to this day we have 6 work days and then Shabbat. We have 6 years, that we work the fields, and then we have the sabbatical year. Then we count 7 times 7 weeks, Sfira Omer, and then we get the Torah on the 50th day, but after 7 weeks. And then, of course, we have a tradition that history will last for 6,000 years, and the 7,000th year will be the time of Mashiach. But Rav Ginsburg gives a different answer. Not that what we just said isn't very fundamental and part of the very fabric of time and space. But he says even more fundamentally are the numbers 3 and 4, which is a bit surprising because we wouldn't really connect that to why are those 2 numbers so important in creation. But he explains that first of all, and we'll see more, 3 and 4 equals 7. And he shows that the first verse of the Torah has 7 words, but it's broken down into the first 3 words and then the next 4. And even in the way that we chant the Torah, we divide that sentence into 3 and 4. Bereshit bara Elokim, and then there's what's called an anachta, a comma or a semicolon. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So the first part has 3 words. Bereshit bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. And then it has 4 words. The heavens and the earth. So he said that is, in a certain way, even more fundamental. Then he says, very interestingly, if you take the gematria of the number 3, shlosha, and of the number 4, arba'ah, when you add them together, they equal Bereshit, 913. Shlosha is 635. Arba'ah is 278. And you add them together and you get 913, which is gematria Bereshit. Avram Abulafia was a great Kabbalist around 1,000 years ago, approximately. And he said there's a very, very important gematria that equals 913. Shlosha devarim yachad. 3 things together. And many people have wondered, what was he getting at? 3 things together. So this we're going to see the idea of creation is very, very much, again, we're looking at call it the lowest common denominator, the lowest common structure of 3 and 4. And again, 3 and 4 equals 7, and we know how important 7 is in creation. And so here we can apply the number 3 more to Maaseh Bereshit, and the number 4, as we've been doing for 2 weeks now, to Maaseh Merkava. As we've been saying, that the inner theme and symbolism of the visions that we've been talking about, whether it's Daniel or Zechariah or Yechezkel, is the number 4. And so Maaseh Merkava is very much connected to the number 4, but Bereshit, Maaseh Bereshit is more connected to 3. And how do we see it? So what did Avram Avolafia mean? And so one of the ideas that I developed, and only this week did I understand it on a deep level, and some of you have heard this from me many times, this idea of one second, I'm just letting people in. 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. How do we see this? I'm doing this in short. God is 1. God is unified. Before creation, there is nothing but the oneness of God. And then God creates, as it were, a finite universe that has the appearance, at least, of being separate from God. That's why people can be atheists and really believe that there's no God. In other words, that God made a world that could even happen. We know that, and we know that the first letter in the Torah is a big bet, which means 2. So 1 becomes 2. God creates a dualistic, a world of opposites, a bipolar, an AC/DC kind of world. And our job is to always see the oneness that plurality is hiding. So 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. This is the same way of what happened with Adam. We're told Adam was created male and female. It was a unified being. And then God separated the male from the female. And now you have 2 beings. And then the Torah says immediately, therefore a man leaves his mother and father and clings to his wife, and they become 1 flesh. So the creation of Adam is 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. And this plays itself out in other realms as well. But this week I understood for the first time this number 3 is when 1 becomes 2, you actually really still now have 3 components. You still have the oneness, but now you have the 2. This is the whole secret of the Magen David, where you have a triangle that has 2 opposite points, but is unified by 1. There are 3 points, but at one point, the 1 becomes 2, but it needs to return to the 1. Or the 1 becomes 2, but it needs to return to the 1. So also you have one of the most important energy paradigms that we have is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And we see this throughout creation, on the physical level, the spiritual level. This idea of how opposites ultimately come together in a third. So we have a world, we have the letter bet. We have 2, but there's always, the oneness is always there. So 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. The 1 and the 2 come together and they're 3. And then the 2 and the 1 come together and they are 3. Very important is the triangle of 3 equals 6. What is the triangle of a number? The triangle of 3 is 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6. The triangle of 4, and we discussed this when connecting the number 4 to the number 10. So the triangle of 4 is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. That equals 10. So here in creation, the 6 days, that's what we said. We probably would have thought the answer to the question is, what two numbers are the most fundamental in creation? We might have thought of 6 and 7. But here we see that the number 3 is actually very connected to the number 6, just like the number 4 is very connected to the 10. Now, we see how these two numbers work together. What we've been saying the whole time is that Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkavah are two sides of the same coin. One way we explained it was Maaseh Bereshit is, as it were, from above to below. In other words, creation is coming from above, and it's just, the light is just coming down. Creation is coming down. Maaseh Merkavah is a human being's attempt to understand how that light actually works and what we can do with it in order to perfect creation, to improve creation, to understand creation. And so Maaseh Merkavah, in a certain way, is the inner dimension of Maaseh Bereshit. So if we start working with these numbers 4 and 3, we see something very, very important. When we put that together, so we have two images, and we discussed this last week, the importance of the way we camped in the desert, where there were 3 tribes on each of the 4 sides with the tabernacle in the middle. The tabernacle was surrounded on all 4 sides, 3 tribes, 3 tribes, 3 tribes, and 3 tribes. So here again, we have 4 and 3. So in other words, the 12 tribes break down to 3 and 4. Just like we already learned how the 4 seasons break down to 3 months of each season in the Jewish concept. So here we have this model of 4 and 3. We have another model of 4 and 3, and that is the breastplate that the high priest wore, where there were 4 rows of 3 stones, precious stones. And so Rav Ginsburg explained the relationship between the 3 and the 4 is that 3 represents process because it's a cross, and 4 represents hierarchy because it's from above to below. So when we think of let's say the 4 worlds, we think of them from above to below. When we think of, let's say, the 5 levels of the soul, we think of above to below. But when we think of process, we think laterally, how one thing moves into another that moves into another. And that's why especially the Baal Shem Tov had a number of his most important concepts in 3s. Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtakah. Submission, separation, and sweetening. This is something we have discussed already. And also, very important for Maaseh Merkavah, the way he took the word chashmal, which is like the bet of Bereshit. You have 2 opposites, but he added a middle mal, chash, mal, mal, to indicate process, that there's a process here. And also the Baal Shem Tov's explanation of how all of reality is made up of olamot, nishamot, and elokut, of worlds, souls, and divinity. And all of this has to do with a consciousness of process, whereas 4 has to do with hierarchy. So here you have 4 times 3 is 12. So we see when we're talking about Maaseh Merkavah and Maaseh Bereshit, we're trying to get to this, the most elemental structures or the fabric of the universe. And so here we can take 6 and 7 and see that in a certain way, 3 and 4 are even more elemental. On the level of time, we see this also. Very interesting is that we have a 19-year cycle of time that determines how the lunar calendar, which is basically the Jewish calendar, can stay in sync with the solar calendar. And this is done through a 19-year process because a lunar calendar is 11 days shorter than a solar. So every 3 years, you're like missing 33 days. Not missing, but the solar and the lunar calendars will be off kilter. So every 7 times in 19 years, we add an extra month. It's called a pregnant month. And that keeps the solar and the lunar calendar in sync with each other. So if you take the idea of 19 years, so it's broken down to 12 years that do not have a second month and 7 that do. Well, 7 is 3 plus 4, and 12 is 3 times 4. So here, Rav Ginsburg is just showing, he's getting down to like trying to show why he is saying that the numbers 3 and 4 are the most fundamental in reality. And we know when it's asked, what was the first thing created? When it says Bereshit, was time and space. And so here we're seeing the 3s and the 4s and their combinations by multiplying them or adding them in time and also in space. And also, if we go to the most fundamental of all Kabbalistic texts, Sefer Yetzirah, the first real text of Kabbalah, the whole book is based on the numbers 3, 7, and 12. That the 22 letters are divided into 3 mother letters, 7 double letters, meaning the letters that can be pronounced in 2 ways, and 12 simple letters. 3 mother letters, which are Aleph, Mem, and Shin, which stands for air. Water, air is Aleph, Mem is Mayim, water, Shin is fire, Eish. So it's the 3 elements, the 7 double, and this represents the days of the week, and the 12 represent the 12 months. So again, if you have 3, 7, and 12, well, 3 and 4 equals 7, and 3 times 4 equals 12. So here, just in many, many different ways, Rav Ginsburg is showing how these numbers, and here I'm just going to end this section, that this is bringing together Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkavah. That the number 3, and we didn't go through every manifestation of the number 3 in creation. There are other ideas here, but 3 represents, and the lowest common denominator, the works of creation, and 4, as we've been seeing, is so fundamental in the understanding of Maaseh Merkavah. Now we're going to end the class with, if you remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the first 2 or 3 classes, we got through 5 verses. And then we got through 10 verses. And so the whole number 4, we've been consumed with its place in these 10 verses. And it ends with a concept, and that's how we'll end the class. So in the 15th, in the 14th verse of Yechezkel, it says that the Chaya angels ran and returned like a vision of lightning. And this is the concept that is talked about and used throughout Kabbalah and Chassidut, called Ratso V'Shov. Those are the words in Hebrew, that these angels were Ratso V'Shov, running and returning like a vision of lightning. In other words, flashes. They're running and returning in flashes of lightning. So let's delve into, relatively quickly, this concept of Ratso V'Shov. So first we'll just start that this is the actual dynamic of the universe. The beating of the heart can be conceived of Ratso V'Shov, Ratso V'Shov. The pulse of the blood running through our veins. When you put your finger on a vein, you feel the pulsation of running and returning. Breathing, we breathe in, we breathe out. That is another manifestation of run and return. The tides, you have high tide and you have low tide. Quite literally, if you spend any length of time by a beach, you could see it. And there are actually places that you see it by the day, that you have high tide and low tide. You could see it in one day, how you have this run and return. Of course, we have the waxing and the waning of the moon. That's a very visible type of we're calling it run and return because it's just the term for this dynamic, dualistic dynamic running through all of creation. In Yaakov's dream, he sees angels going up and down the ladder. And so his dream is super symbolic, but the angels going up and down also represent the ladder in a certain way is the ladder of life. And the up and down of the angels are also a person's emotions, our high moments and our low moments, our happy moments and our sad moments. Everyone knows this type of dynamic. Here again, it's all under the rubric of running and returning. In a different vision of Zechariah, in the 3rd chapter, so the person who's being spoken about is told that you will be a stander among you will be a mover among those who are standing. And it's explained what it means is that when a human being reaches their potential, they're called movers. And the angels are called standers. And the sages describe this running and returning of the Chayot here. And one of the explanations is they run up to try to get a vision of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. They run up and they lift their heads over like the edge, and they get a vision of the Shekhinah, and it's so awesome and so powerful. They run back to where they were originally, and then let's do it again. They run back, get a vision, and they run back. So the idea is, though, with all of their running, they're not going anywhere. And this can be applied to human beings also, that sometimes we think we're like moving, we're moving mountains, we're going here, we're going there, we're seeing this, we're seeing that, we're experiencing this, we're experiencing that. And then in retrospect, sometimes we look back and it's like, I was just running in place. I was actually not going anywhere. And other times when it appears that we're standing in place, we're building a profession, we're building a business, we're building a home, we're building a family. And sometimes it appears in the moment, I'm not going anywhere. But then we see what we've done is we've accomplished the most important things in life. So that's the difference between people who are standing and people who are moving. Again, all part of this dynamic called Ratzov V'Shov. Then there's an idea we've talked about many times. There's two types of light. What's called Or Yashar and Or Chozer. Or Yashar is light from above to below, meaning really coming from God into the world, into our neshamas. And then there's Or Chozer, what we do with that light and how we try to return that light to God. This is a perfect example of God is, as it were, running into the world, and we are, in a certain way, running out of the world to be closer to God. And we have an opposite here. Usually when we think of running and returning, so we think that we are running out of this world to get to a higher level spiritually, and then we have to return to this world. For God, in a certain way, it's just the opposite. He runs into the world, but if his energy would stay here, it would nullify everything. And so he immediately retreats. He returns so that this world can exist. As if, if his light would be fully revealed, it would nullify creation. We are most certainly hoping for a time in the Messianic era where this light will be tremendously revealed more than it is now. And this is the whole idea that we are going to get to of the four who entered into the Pardes, into paradise. And we're told that only Rabbi Akiva went in peace and came out in peace. And the reason that is given is only Rabbi Akiva was focused on the return before he ran, meaning before they attempted this high mystical experience, he was already had his feet on the ground. All the other three got caught in the run and couldn't focus on the return in a way. We're going to get into that because that is also an experience of Maaseh Merkavah. Now here, one of the most important things about Ratzov V'Shov, that the gematria of Ratzov V'Shov equals 611 equals Torah. This is so important because sometimes we think of Torah as being black and white, written in stone, no changes, not movable. But we know that the word for Jewish law is halacha, is going, is walking, is moving. We're the movers. We're not in one place. And so Torah is the epitome of Ratzov V'Shov. In fact, it's teaching us how to run and how to return. And then a beautiful thing that we've also spoken about, the verse, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, I place God before me at all times. Shaviti means I place. I place God before me at all times. The Baal Shem Tov explained that Shaviti also comes from the word shaveh, equal. So the Baal Shem Tov said, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. He interpreted it to mean, I am always seeking equanimity because I realize that everything comes from God. And therefore, when things are really good, I shouldn't get too manic about it. And when things are not so good, I shouldn't get too depressed about it. In other words, I should learn to balance run and return. We always need to run and we always need to return, but we can't have it in extremes, like extreme sports. We have to balance extreme runs, and extreme shavs is I'm afraid to do anything. I have to stay in my comfort zone. I can't take any chance. I can't, no risks, no changes. I have to stay the way I am. That is extreme return, shav. And so the Baal Shem was saying we have to learn to balance run and return. Here, I'll end with a beautiful connection to Avram Avinu, is that his first command from God is Lech Lecha, go out to yourself. Meaning you have to take a physical journey. You have to leave your father's house and your birthplace and your land of birth, and you have to go to the land that I will show you. You have to run, ratzo, you have to go. But then it says lecha, go to yourself, that this outside journey ultimately is also an inner journey. That is the epitome of lech lecha. And that's why that is the first thing. And we know, for those who have my book, one was Avram. Everything in Avram's life paved the way for the Jewish people for all time. So this first command of God was not being spoken only to Avram. This is not a command, it's a directive, it's advice, it's wisdom of how to manage this world. So we always have to be moving, improving, fixing, rectifying, healing, but at the same time, that's in the world. But also, we have to have a mirror image within ourselves. And this is a very, very beautiful thing, because in the holiday of Sukkot, probably the one time of the year that we act out run and return more than any other time in a physical ritual is when shaking lulav. Because we take the lulav, we hold it to our heart, and then we shake out. We shake out, lech, and then we bring it back, lecha. Lech, lecha, or ratzo v'shov. And each time we do it, of course, there's a whole set of kavanot, of ideas that we could be and should be thinking about. We're not just doing it like this. Every time we're running, there's a whole list of things that we could be thinking about, intentions. And the same thing when we draw it back to our heart. But Sukkot is actually acting out lech lecha and ratzo v'shov. So we'll end there. And I'm just going to tell you quickly where the rest of this series is going to go. So next week, we are going to move into understanding the different angelic forms that Yechezkel is seeing. And it's very possible we will actually finish the first chapter next week. We will go through it. And as I've mentioned, we're not trying to do every verse. We're trying to get to the bigger picture because many of the verses in the upcoming 15 or 16 verses is about how this, we'll call it a chariot, moved. And it's extremely difficult to understand what is being explained here, what is being described. So we're mostly centering on who are these angels he's seeing, what do they represent, and we'll see that there's a number of different type of angels, and hopefully we'll get through the rest of chapter 1. We need to know that from chapters 2 to 9, God is speaking to Yechezkel. Chapter 1 ends after this whole vision. Then he hears a voice, and God is speaking to him. And that's how the chapter ends. And then from 2 to 9 is a whole list of conversations between God and Yechezkel, different prophecies that he's being told, different acts that he has to accomplish. And then chapter 10 returns to Maaseh Merkavah. It's as if chapters 2 to 9 are like a parentheses because he picks up in chapter 10 where he leaves off in his vision. And then he adds new information or new descriptions of his visions. And so hopefully next week, we'll be able to get to the rest of chapter 1. Then we're going to have to go to chapter 10 and see what it's teaching us. And then after we've accomplished that, we're going to return and start filling in from a more global, a more contextual concept of Maaseh Merkavah in all of Jewish history, especially different statements from the sages regarding Maaseh Merkavah, and trying to put it in a bigger picture. And at that point, we will have accomplished what we can in call it a first time through Maaseh Merkavah.